Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. It is January 19th, 2024, 12:15 p.m. And it snowed again overnight. I was not happy. I had to shovel off my porch and then create another path for my chickens and guineas. They were getting a little excited yesterday because some of it melted enough for them to walk around, or at least around the buildings, and now they're all stuck inside the coop, which means that it's a hot mess in there. I mean, you could only imagine, like, when they're pooping inside, it gets frozen, it gets stuck to the perches and stuff. Only people who raise chickens know what I'm talking about. It's extremely difficult to clean out the coop in this bad weather. Plus, it's just no fun. But anyway, back to business here. And this little mini oil painting is by Sawlight42 on eBay. Let it snow. No, I don't want it to snow. No snow at all. But this one is really cute. So I'm going to read a testimony that I received in 2023. And it's a long one. I don't know. Let me see. I don't know how far I'll get. So we're just going to call this part 2. And this person's name is Adrian. It's male. Adrian Columb. Dear Lorraine, I heard your recent chat with VRL Serb. So sorry to hear of your targeting. I am a TI. And I have had personal entanglement with the undercover terrorist federal police responsible. One of them got detained by uniformed state police after assaulting me in 2010, and his current chapter is all in cover-up. I've attached my account of the early days. Since then, they have pursued me across the world with their zappers blasting using handhelds, stakeouts nearby me, and drones, along with more or less constantly gang stalking me. I have some evidence of this, though I am constantly hacked. So not sure what remains. The sooner I find safe haven, the sooner I can start retrieving whatever remains from the places I've stored it. Based on extensive medical diagnostic testing and clinical evaluation, I have a few different types of vestibular and brain damage from the torture and have completed the tests for Havana syndrome. While my unusual combination of symptoms does not correlate with any one known medical condition, they do correlate quite well with Havana syndrome, or HS. I haven't been able to tell any of the neurologists or ENTs I've seen what has really happened to me, so the best diagnoses they can come up with so far is that I have a combination of 1, balance disorder, 2, vestibular migraine, and 3, neurocognitive deficits in working memory and processing speed. When combined, these 3 diagnoses correlate with Dr. Hoffer, Balaban, and Levin's vestibular and neurocognitive, quote, acquired neurosensory dysfunction, unquote, also known as Havana syndrome. I also have 4 short-lasting unilateral neural gyriform, also known as SUNA, S-U-N-A, headaches, or polyneuropathy, neuralgia, according to previous specialists, and, number 5, chronic microhemorrhage in the anterior cingulate gyrus of my frontal cortex. When combined with the first 3 diagnoses, these last 2 diagnoses correlate well with Dr. Giordano's proposed further physiological effects of DEWs, directed energy weapons, on the brain. After 2+ years of constant torture, I seemingly have the full package. I now take a vestibular migraine med. It's called flunarizine, 10 milligrams a day, and neuralgia medication, pregabalin, 50 milligrams 2 times a day, which thankfully helps a lot. I'm still getting zapped, but it doesn't hurt nearly as much anymore. I have also done vestibular rehabilitation exercises which help restore my sense of balance. I also plan to do neurofeedback training, which is NFT, to try to fix the damaged neuronal networks caused by neurocognitive deficits. Anyway, I wanted to introduce myself. I fight this war alone, as has been necessary, but I'm open to the concept of strength in numbers, so I'm happy to collaborate in any ways that I might help. Best regards, Adrian. Adrian sent me a 19-page attachment called And Pigs Might Fly by Adrian Columb. He provided me his LinkedIn URL and Vimeo URL. There's a disclaimer that I need to read, okay? Disclaimer. This historical account is intended to serve as my testimony about the events described if I cannot give it in person. Some of the names, places, and affiliations mentioned have been changed to protect the innocent. Apart from that, the story is as in real life. I can unmask the obfuscated details if there's good reason, but I would prefer not to for safety reasons. A vast wealth of details has also either been summarized or omitted in the interest of brevity and because my deadline is tight, but I can potentially elaborate on and explain those on request. This history is mostly presented in chronological order, but whenever that is not the case, I have noted the year, example, where I draw connections or comparisons with more recent events. Then there is a preamble. It is important that you understand the history of my situation because the present reality is almost unfathomable to most people without knowing how it came to be. I have incriminated myself at various points in this document, some of which have redacted, or at least for now. I deeply regret those wild times and extremely stupid things I did with incredibly hazardous people. I was trying to finance my own medical use of substances that helped me to succeed in life, and I made some very bad decisions in the process. During that period, I had the misfortune of enraging a team of corrupt, violent, unscrupulous, and extremely dangerous Australian Federal Criminal Intelligence Agency agents. A group of them tried to kill me in 2010 to cover up a violent assault by one of them earlier the same day. And they are still actively trying to suppress, maim, and murder me as soon as possible. I tried to ignore them for many years in the hope that they would eventually get bored and stop hunting me. But now, more than a decade later, they won't stop. So I've decided I would rather die on my feet than continue to live on my knees, hence this writing. I am more than willing to face any legal consequences for my actions. The threat I face today from these police terrorists is far greater than any legal process could ever pose. As the end of any period of incarceration, I would finally be free to get my life back, something I've been denied for over 12 years. I would therefore very much prefer to be arrested for whatever frame-up the corrupt Australian Federal Criminal Intelligence Agencies who are hunting me have cooked up, and then be deported home to Australia from Europe to face the fair and open judicial process, then continue to face these cruel, unscrupulous terrorist police who continue to torture me day after day. They deprive me of any real freedom. Their goal evidently is to eliminate me without getting caught, ideally before this tale is told. Tough luck, guys. If you're reading this, then your true motivations are already public. Okay, so now I cut and pasted this into this Word document. So let me just, I need to, let's see, get this, there are numbers, so it'll make it a little bit easier for me to read this if I edit this just a little bit. Okay, so index page part 1, 2009 to 2012, in detail with a preview of more recent history. Number 1, A Debt of Gratitude, redacted. Number 2, Gangster's Paradise, redacted. Number 3, Tyranny Mayhem, redacted. Number 4, Into the Abyss, redacted. Number 5, Badlands Tourist, redacted. 6, Cut Chemist, redacted. Number 7, Badlands Cowboy, redacted. Number 9, oh, I'm sorry, number 8, His Biatch. I'm going to just say that for YouTube's sake. I don't know what you're allowed to say here anymore. The Biatch, B-I-T-C-H, redacted. Number 9, and just for the record, YouTube, I'm reading this. These are not my words. Number 9, The Last Days of Speed, redacted. Number 10, Ice Crystals, redacted. Number 11, First Contact. Okay. 3:12, And Pigs Might Fly. 6:13, Australian Federal Police Agents. 9:14, Joe. 11:15, The Death Trap. 14:16, Preview of Future History. 15, Part 2, 2012 to 2020, in detail with a preview of more recent history being drafted. Number 17, The Subcontinent. Number 18, Sydney, Byron Bay, Nimbin, and Mullumbin by Spy Cops. Number 19, Melbourne Terrorists, again. 20, Scandinavian Exile. Number 21, Southeast Asian Exile. Number 22, 5 years in exile in India. Man, this guy's traveled around, that's for sure, huh? Number 23, A Death in the Family. Number 24, Berlin and Goa, G-O-A, in exile. 25, Melbourne Lockdown Terrorists. 26, Further Preview of Future History, Part 3, 2020 to 2022, in detail, being drafted. 27, Berlin Lockdown Terrorists. Number 28, Tenerife, T-E-N-E-R-I-F-E, the T word. Number 19, Bucharest, Jabby Wabby, T word. Number 30, the Berlin Teas. Again. 31, Amsterdam Teas. 32, the Paris Teas. 33, the Bordeaux Teas. 34, the Berlin Teas. Oh my goodness, yet again, they're everywhere, huh? 35, the London Teas. You know, that's, you know, like the list. 36, Tenerife Teas. Again. 37, Joe, again. 38, High-Tech Teas. 39, The Next Chapter or Conclusion, if there is one. Number 40, The Epitaph. If I don't get to write this part, maybe someone else can. 2:11, First Contact, in late 2009. I had moved temporarily to my mother's house in the suburb of Malvern, in Melbourne's inner east. And I was heading back there to do some computer work. And as I drove up High Street in Prahran, I noticed in my rearview mirror the same bright green flatbed utility truck that had seemingly been following me for some time that night on my way back from the Badlands. That is his nickname for the inner northern suburbs, and on recent occasions turned right off of High Street onto Chapel Street. I was very curious about the drivers, and it got the better of me. I turned down the next main street, the Avenue, and worked my way back towards Chapel Street, though the back streets emerging almost opposite Windsor train station. As luck would have it, the green utility truck was parked in front of a fast food restaurant opposite the train station. I thought that if my suspicion that its occupants had been following me was correct, that I might be able to confirm it. If I was correct, I also wanted to find out who they were and why they were being so aggressive, having seen that I was then quite sure was one of the cars almost run off my mum off the road days earlier in her street. The restaurant was empty apart from a stocky man of average height, with short, light to medium brown hair. He was seemingly in his mid-30s, with a slightly rectangular-shaped head. He was waiting for his food to be prepared, and I asked him if the sporty, bright green utility with a covered flatbed that was parked in front of the restaurant was his. And he replied proudly that yes, it was. While the first man and I spoke, his much taller, bald-shaved head partner returned from the toilet behind the service bar, which was not usually accessible to the public. He had a more oval-shaped head and was seemingly also in his mid-30s. I asked them what they had been doing that night, as though I was just making chit-chat with some random strangers. And the shorter of the two men replied in a deep voice with a broad Australian accent that he and his mate had been drinking at the pub diagonally across the road. Picking up Sheila's, Shielas, which translates loosely from Aussie bloke language to talking to women. Okay, well, thank you for telling me that, because I'm clueless. As I had seen their car following me in the Badlands shortly before then, his untrue answer seemingly indicated that he had recognized me as their target. He motioned to his partner to recognize me too. The taller man's facial expression shifted to one of realization, then went stone cold. Observing that non-verbal conversation between them made it clear that they were in fact the people who had been following me, as I had suspected. I said, quote, "So, you haven't been following me around the other side of Melbourne in that UTE?" Unquote. They denied it. I knew they'd lied, but was unwilling to press them further. It became awkward to stay there while my food was being prepared, so I left briefly and moved my mother's car to a parking space directly in front of the restaurant. I parked it in front of their UTE. I don't know what that, something UTE. And beside, I guess guys know what is that? Is that the trailer? And beside where they would soon sit down to eat at a table positioned perpendicular to the road on the footpath. I went inside the restaurant again to collect my food, passing them as they exited. As I was heading back to the car, I stopped and said to the shorter man that, quote, "If you are who I think you are, then you or one of your colleagues almost ran my mum off the road a few days in front of me, and that's not okay," unquote. He laughed. "Ha! Your mom?" with a smirk. The trailer man then commented that the car I was driving was substandard, to which I replied, "Yeah, it's a piece of shit." He misheard what I replied, evidently thinking I had actually been referring to him personally. He yelled, quote, "What did you say?" unquote, then jumped up to stand, put one foot on the bench that he had been sitting on, reached into his ankle holster, and again screamed, "What did you say?" Even more loudly, this time staring me dead in the eyes. He was indicating that he was on the edge of unholstering his concealed handgun to unalive me in response to perceived verbal slight. Perceived. I'm going to say keyword, perceived verbal slight. Because these perps always misinterpret what it is that you're saying. They like to spin it around. His eyes were bugging out of his head. His face was red with anger, and he seemed as though he may have been strongly affected by very recent consumption of a strong stimulant drug. Considering the fact that ice, also known as crystal meth, had mysteriously reappeared in Melbourne that night after many months of absence, at the exact location they had tailed me from, and considering how extreme his behavior was, I strongly suspect that ice is what he had taken too much of and was not handling it well at all. I answered him truthfully that, quote, "I said the car is a piece of shit," unquote. With a look of disbelief, he turned to his partner for confirmation that I was telling the truth, who gave it to him with a nod. They stared at each other without words for a pregnant moment longer, until the shorter man turned and told me firmly to, quote unquote, drive. I drove away as fast as possible, seemingly in danger of being shot if I stayed there. I turned left onto Dangannog Road and raced directly to my mother's house, entering through the back gate, dived through the doggy door, and then hid in the dark living room. The pair had followed there and entered the gate around a minute after I did. Through the living room window, I saw them come to the back door, which was unlocked. The pair talked quietly to each other for a moment, seemingly about whether or not to enter the house. If they had tried the door handle and come in, then I may well have been killed, unalived then and there. Or what then was their plan, if not that? Seemingly iced up killer cops with concealed firearms and itchy trigger fingers. What a total nightmare. The pair then retreated outside the gate and went around the corner of the fence. They scanned the living room with 2 green lasers while I hid in the space under the television in the dark. They were seemingly using the lasers to try to locate or terrify me. I feared they would start shooting into the house with myself, my sleeping parents inside. Their extreme reaction to what had just transpired on Chapel Street may have also been because I had just seen their faces. So their covers as random members of the public were suddenly blown. Even still, a home visit with apparent murderous intent and subsequent long-term extreme harassment program described below both seem extremely disproportionate. The officers could seemingly have just assigned other colleagues to follow me instead. Maybe then it was that I had seen one of them behaving so badly while also seemingly being completely off his face on hard drugs that got their goats. I may never know. Only they know the real reasons why the situation escalated so much over almost total nobody, small fish like myself. I hope that someone above their stations in the agency they work for, the government it serves, and one of the anti-corruption bodies tasked with the oversight will eventually compel the pair to explain the events of that evening, as these AFP federal agents and their colleagues have held an enormous grudge against me since that very night. Number 4. From then on, the same fleet of cars that had formerly been following me more discreetly started tearing around me wherever I walked or drove. They would rev up their loud engines, screech their tires and burnouts, and at night constantly shine their high beam lights to blind me. This was seemingly all in order to disrupt and give me as little piece as possible. Their cars' number plates often had messages like 007, also known as license to unalive. I have to say that, guys. In quotes, he wrote license to something else in them, belying their true nature. The team of corrupt police concerned seemingly have no qualms and are apparently actually proud to be stone-cold unalivers if they think they can get away with it. As soon you will learn. During that period, I was also photographed several hundred times by apparent undercover police using smartphone cameras in passing cars. This was also apparently an intimidation tactic, as it is seemingly not plausible to need many hundreds of photos of a target and to get them so overtly. I was also photographed with a professional camera by an apparent AFP officer. The tall, skinny man snuck up close to where I sat on St. Kilda foreshore late one night. He wore all black clothing, including a baseball cap. I heard the sound of his camera taking photos, so I noticed and then briefly confronted him. He quickly skulked away. Then there is their pièce de résistance, The crown jewel in their terrorism program, the helicopters and planes that have previously been circling less frequently and more far away, then started overt, direct flyovers, constantly buzzing my location loudly wherever I went. It's not easy to describe what these criminal police do with their fleet of taxpayer-funded aircraft in order to harass a target, but I will try. Oh, I feel your pain. It happens to me too. The little old me. Here in Kentucky, there is almost always a minimum 1, but usually 2, 3, or even 7, 4 different aircraft close enough to be audible, usually also in full view, so as to terrorize, and more often than not directly buzzing overhead, example, to shake the building I'm in, or circling the most terrifying ways possible no matter where I go. It is blatant intimidation, suppression, harassment, and psychological torture, nothing less. It is seemingly against Australian law to harass someone like that, so they should all go to jail for such disgraceful abuse of their official positions. Proving what they do in the skies has been difficult, but I'm getting there. I have provided a few example photographs near the end of this document. You can also see copious other video evidence of it on my Vimeo account, and specific examples of it in my public LinkedIn posts from the past year. See links on page 1. I also hope to demonstrate it more thoroughly in the future through analysis of open source intelligence sources, particularly historical ADSB flight path records. On occasion, I was also physically assaulted by their thugs in those early days, as I will mention in more detail later, but the relentless airborne terrorism campaign has left much deeper scars on me than the physical attacks have. Even the sound of a helicopter or propeller plane flying overhead can now cause me anxiety. As mentioned, these federal agents are still attempting to do the same to me to this day at every opportunity, no matter where I go in the world. I currently live directly in front of Tenerife South, TFS International Airport in the Canary Islands in Spain, because they can't do their usual circle work in the flight path of the passenger jets that are constantly flying through, nor seemingly do they want to show 5, the airport's control tower, what they really do when they're out of sight. But as soon as I leave my small town, they start the relentless overt terror flyovers circling again. I can only begin to calculate the monetary cost of what they do with our public funds to facilitate their non-stop airborne terrorism program. For example, one of the charter planes they flew in Berlin in 2021 cost the equivalent in euros of around 300 per hour to rent. That's AUD. I guess that's Austria. AUD. 300 per hour to rent, not including the fuel and the wages for those highly trained federal criminal intelligence agents and their pilots. One of the helicopters chartered for short flyovers in Berlin cost the equivalent in euros of around AUD 180 per 15 minutes. And these agents do up to many terror flyovers per day. They multiply that by up to 4 aircraft at a time, and it's clearly costing Australian and more recently Spanish, German, Romanian, Dutch, French, and British taxpayers many thousands of dollars per day for these corrupt police to harass, suppress, torture, and seek opportunities to try to unalive me without getting caught. In the end, I'm just a loose end for corrupt spy cops. Not an actual criminal anymore. So I am in reality blatantly not worth that level of investment. Non-violent drug offenses expire after 10 years anyway, apparently. So why are they still hounding me? The answer will become clear as you read on. I recognized and spoke again with the shorter of the 2 federal agents from the incident at the fast food restaurant on Chapel Hill in the weeks following that night, this time on the street near my mom's house. We spoke about the incessant flyovers and circling by one of their small white propeller planes that was currently overhead. I said, quote, "They are relentless," unquote. He replied, quote, "Yes, they are," unquote. Number 12, and pigs fly. Oh my goodness. And after some weeks of this extremely overt harassment campaign on land and from the skies, I told my mother and stepfather that I was being followed and harassed by a team of aggressive undercover police. I mentioned that I had recently had a face-to-face encounter with two of them on Chapel Street, but I admitted that the officers had come to their house so as to not terrify them. I also mentioned that I observed that some of the perpetrators were evidently climbing into the ceiling of their house to watch me as part of a 24/7 surveillance program. One night, my stepfather came for a drive with me to see what all the fuss was about. The agents, of course, did not harass me while he was present to witness it, so he didn't get to see them in action. In retrospect, it was probably futile anyway, as he was already quite night blind. By that stage, it might not have been able to see them, even if they had been tearing around us in cars and aircraft, as had become usual when I was driving alone. He had long known me to be a reliable, truthful person and an honest journalist, so I therefore thought my word would be trusted. Even though I never said anything so extraordinary before, he doubted me. Considering the phenomenal intensity of the harassment program these police have waged against me for more than a decade since then, it is clearly designed to disrupt every aspect of the target's normal life and stress them out beyond what they can cope with. The relentless terrorism campaign is apparently an attempt to send the target over the edge if possible. That might work to crack some people mentally, but I have a hard head. Number 6. If the person doesn't crack under pressure, as I didn't, then the goal at that stage is apparently to at least have them be perceived as being mentally unsound by those they depend on due to the extremely unlikely nature of their story. Oh yes, that's what they do to us, folks. Yeah, if they can't crack you because you're pig-headed like me and this guy and you guys, then they try to discredit you with the mental health fabrication narrative. The point of the exercise seems to discourage anyone from listening to the target about their extraordinary situation. It is a cruel exercise in disinformation to inflict suppression and protect the agents from scrutiny at all expense of the target's reputation. The police officers who were harassing me 24/7 evidently sought to wind me up into a panic, and then sat back and watched as my life and credibility were dismantled the more I talked about them to others. They might have known from experience that their targets were likely to reveal to loved ones and friends that they're being followed and targeted by undercover police. This almost inevitably leads to the person becoming generally disbelieved. Their word then more easily discredited or even dismissed out of hand. The target may then lose vital rapport with those they depend on, further isolating them from their usual support network. Hell, serious criminals didn't even believe me. Their optimism and false sense of invisibility seemed boundless. While I was and am deeply traumatized by my ordeal, and while there are other disastrously erroneous people from that period who are yet to be corrected using evidence that was unavailable then, I was and still am of completely sound mind. Well, it sounds like you are, and you write really well, and you write a lot, and you're very detailed. Yeah, I can see how you would be a journalist. I can see how they'd be targeting you for speaking the truth. Making their target appear deranged is seemingly just one of the range of tactics that this particular team of corrupt police use to marginalize and discredit a person. I hope that you can more easily recognize and see through their cunning ruse now that you're aware of it. I'm aware of it. Yep. The Manalapan police use that BS. But hey, it's used on them too by their own. So what goes around comes around. Just know that what goes around comes around. The way they're doing this to you, they also do it to each other, because they're always trying to one-up each other and rat each other out. So they will rat each other out. In early 2010, I moved to a house at 10 Godfrey Avenue in St. Kilda East, where the harassment program described above continued with land, air, and in-roof surveillance 24/7. I became determined to try to find a way to stop the harassment and to clear my name with those I care about most. I started investigating my oppressors, learning how they operate, and trying to find a way to drag them out of the shadows and into the light of the public and or official scrutiny. I hope this writing finally does that. As it happens that it's far easier said than done, as they're well protected, but I could never have imagined how much so. Investigating undercover Australian federal agents while they also hunt you is like trying to swat fruit flies that are constantly reinfest your food after you swipe at them. They're like ghosts in the system, shrouded in smoke, deliberately hiding in society's blind spots and abusing the power which that privilege brings them seemingly at every opportunity. They do whatever they want because they are effectively the law of the land and know how to get away with it. As the saying goes, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The police team concerned are shielded on one side by the operational wall, i.e., there's no real oversight of criminal intelligence operations from the government, the public, or even other police. They're also shielded on the other side by the, quote, the blue wall of silence, unquote, i.e., where police show blind loyalty to each other and will back each other up 100% no matter what they've done. Yeah, even if they beat their wives, they'll back them up. Yeah, that goes around. We've heard about that. They'll beat their wives and nobody does anything about it. They'll abuse drugs, they'll beat their kids, and nobody does anything about it. That's okay. Karma's coming for you guys. Where the police show blind loyalty to each other and will back each other up 100% no matter what they've done. So we'll usually never talk about or report any of the terrible things their colleagues do. Oh, and I'm going to add, and if they do, then their senior official will fire them and call them an enemy of the state. Take away their weapons and make them go for a mental health exam, like in Manalapan, New Jersey. In this case, they're probably all in on it anyway, as that team seemingly wouldn't hire anyone whose loyalty to the law might impede their team's perpetual breaking of it. They are clearly well vetted, and clearly well vetted, and number 7. So he's got it listed. Number 7, only the most blindly loyal but otherwise unscrupulous agents are brought inside that circle. Other police are also kept at arm's length. For example, the state police are also tricked by them, with stakeouts being hurriedly packed up and cleaned out at the slightest whiff of a call to the emergency police number. Additional shielding comes from the general assumption that federal police are beyond reproach and are therefore simply trusted to do the right thing, as extremely naive as that sounds to me now. They're the watchers, but nobody's watching them. Protection also comes from the apparently ineffectual nature of Australia's anti-corruption and parliamentary oversight bodies that are supposed to, but clearly fail to provide checks and balances to such otherwise unbridled power. Protection for undercover Australian federal agents is baked into the system by design. Undercover police are not supposed to be uncovered. They are not supposed to be outright terrorists, either though, so I'm doing my best to expose them in the name of truth and justice, despite their entrenched nature and the constant onslaught that I face from them to this day. I can't recall the name of the temporary housemate I had 10 Godfrey Avenue, who seemingly collaborated with the police stakeout there. But he was tall, balding, had a broad Aussie accent, and drove an enormous orange truck. One day he revealed that he knew that my former housemate Cindy and I secretly called him, quote-unquote, Salty, which we strictly only ever did when he was out of the house. Salty was short for salt of the earth, a common colloquial saying which matched his seemingly honest but dry personality. Cindy could probably still identify him based on that description, as she sublet the room to him and may remember or have a record of his name. When Salty revealed knowledge which he couldn't have overheard himself, I then became suspicious that he was potentially a police informant who was giving them access to my house, or even possibly an undercover police officer himself. During that period, I was so pushed to the ground by a mid to late 20s well-built male plainclothes officer who was of almost average height. The incident happened in an aisle in Kohl's supermarket in Balaclava as I reached down for an item on the low shelf. I recognized him. Oops. Okay, okay, 1 second. I just scrolled a little too much. I recognized him from several other occasions when he was with his slightly older female partner. She was taller than he, skinny and quite pretty, with long, wavy, light brown hair. The pair sometimes drove a convertible and sometimes also kissed and cuddled in public, pretending to be just random lovers, canoodling. Example, in the foyer of McDonald's restaurant in St. Kilda, where I sat working on my laptop at the night on one of my music event productions. Over the years, I also saw the shorter agent from the incident on Chapel Street at several outdoor musical festivals, one of which was directing a group of younger men in their early 20s who were seemingly his field Team 2 command. More often than not, after leaving such events, I had mysterious problems with my car that could seemingly have led to serious accidents. That same undercover police officer was standing near my car when I departed one such event. I then got a flat tire on the freeway that could seemingly just as easily have caused a blowout and a serious high-speed accident in which I could have died, could have passed away. I suspect that he and or his teammates may have sabotaged my car so I could potentially have an accident on the way home and solve their ongoing loose-end problem. Number 8. At another such musical festival, a large tree branch was suspiciously placed across the exit road as I departed the site for home, evidently yet another sabotage attempt which could have claimed my life. Oh, that's scripted, by the way. I've experienced that too. I stopped just in time to avoid hitting it, but could see the dust of a car speeding away. Oh yeah, keep wobbling my phone because it's true. I stopped just in time to avoid hitting it, but I could see the dust of a car speeding away. Its occupants must have placed the branch there. Yeah. Just moments before, as other cars had been leaving the same way, without incident for hours, and on my way home from yet another such musical festival, I stopped on a dark country road leading back to the highway for one last rest break before the long drive back to Melbourne. A few minutes after stopping, I got out of the car to urinate on a tree. It's amazing how men do this stuff, right? I then saw headlights coming from a direction of the festival behind me and could hear a car engine approaching. To my surprise, the car stopped around 150 to 200 meters back from where I had stopped, still well out of sight, so the drivers couldn't have been known I was parked there on the side of the road there unless they had a tracker on me or my car. I apologize for the wiggling of my camera. That just started when I mentioned about the tree. Oh, thank you for stopping, you pieces of crap. Let's see. The other car's engine and headlights were then turned off. Alone, terrified, and fearing an imminent attack in the dark, I jumped back in the car and drove to the highway as quick as I could. Number 13. Australian federal police agents since 2009. These police have also conducted insidious psychological warfare against me. For example, visiting radio stations I was listening to late at night, where they would convince the DJs to change the playlist to include songs with titles and or lyrics designed to get under my skin. They usually chose songs with lyrics about the horrible feeling of being under surveillance. For example, like the song, I always feel like somebody's watching me, and they're watching me, oh. Apparently to rub it in that they're always watching. Attempt to unsettle and terrorize me even further. I hope you are now starting to see some of the many different layers of their terrorism campaigns. After one such blatantly obvious graveyard shift reprogramming session at SYN FM Melbourne, that's probably a radio station, probably much to the annoyance of the AFP agent concerned, the radio DJ announced in surprise that, quote, an AFP agent just left the studio, unquote. I then knew which agency they worked for. It was a huge leap forward, as the spooks I was fighting had started to become less transparent. There's a saying that you can't fight what you can't see, and I was getting closer to being able to see my hidden enemy. The same corrupt police terrorists have now followed me overseas, and as AFP officers represent all Australian law enforcement agencies overseas, they clearly are from the AFP. What is still unclear today, but seems increasingly likely, is whether these officers were a part of the AFP and Victoria Police Joint Piranha Task Force, and or whether or not they also seconded to the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, and whether that shadowy organization has operational control over their ongoing mission to terrorize and evidently to unalive me too. I moved to 34 Fenwick Street, Carlton North, where I sublet a room from Lloyd Noske, Noske, which is his real name, and where the AFP's team harassment campaign continued. Lloyd was and is probably still quite a disgusting person. He left rotting food around the house, never cleaned. He urinated on a communal toilet seats and floors without wiping it up. He urinated on a covered carport garage in the back of the house so it stank and was therefore unusable, and camped on the living room couch almost permanently with a pile of papers, food, rubbish strewn across the table that formed a chaotic centerpiece of the main common room of the terrace house. He was vile and obnoxious to boot. Number 9. A couple was staying in a larger room. Let me just get this here. Number 9. A couple was staying in the larger of the spare rooms when I moved in, but they were in the process of fleeing because Lloyd was so offensive to them. Their room was larger than mine, so I moved there when they moved out. The young woman had told me that Lloyd was a creep, quote unquote, and had touched her inappropriately during a massage he had offered her. She was from the USA. A stereotype at the time being that Americans sometimes overreacted and took offense to things that weren't actually intended in the way that they're interpreted. So I decided to give Lloyd the benefit of the doubt, but soon learned that he had absolutely no moral compass. Not knowing that I had already heard that lewd backstory in a drunken stupor one night, he also admitted to me that another previous female subtenant had also moved out for the same reason. Duh. Okay. All right. Yes. What part of that don't you get? And yet another drunken stupor one morning, Lloyd told me that he was struggling for money. He then said something surprising that, quote, I should do what you do, unquote. Detecting a threat of potential police infiltration into my home once again, I said, "What's that, Lloyd? What do I do?" He replied in a slurred speech, quote unquote, "Sell drugs." I said, quote, "I have nothing to do with selling drugs, Lloyd." A statement that had been blatantly true for many months by that point. It was therefore odd that he had somehow been fed information about me from some time before I even met him, as we knew no one in common. The police team had seemingly falsely told Lloyd that I was a drug dealer in order to convince him that I was a bad person, so he would allow them secret access to my home. I could hear that someone was frequently climbing into the ventilation shaft above my bedroom around 5 minutes after I woke up, and after each time I came home from outside, and was climbing out around 5 minutes before each time I went outside and when I was gathering belongings to take, and also shortly after I went to bed. For example, when I'd seemingly fallen asleep. They were evidently observing me from the vent in the ceiling of my room. I realized that having actual eyes on me all times was part of their modus operandi. I was sick and tired of being watched 24/7, as anyone would be, so I pondered how to flush out the perpetrators into the bright light of day. One afternoon, I lit a very large, thick incense stick with a jet lighter and then held it up to the ventilation shaft. An intense plum of smoke billowed through the small holes in the vent cover, which a man was hiding behind. Moments later, I heard him, yippee! I heard him gasping for breath loudly inside the duct, and he choked on the smoke and coughed his lungs out loudly several times. Gets karma. I then heard him clamber along and out of the duct, stumble across the roof loudly, and climb down into the stakeout house next door. Within an hour, Lloyd banged on my door loudly and ordered me to not light incense in his house, quote unquote, ever again. I had not opened my door since the incident, so it's doubtful he could have even smelled it. And particularly not almost an hour later. He was clearly too big and clumsy to have climbed into the ventilation shaft himself, but was seemingly in recent communication with whoever had. So I then became even more suspicious of his potential involvement with the police who were hounding me. I could also tell that someone, either Lloyd and or plausibly others who he gave access to, was entering my room via the hall door to my ensuite bathroom when I wasn't there, as the lock was regularly being pried open. I made a fuss. I barricaded the door, which he never used to open anyway. And I told him I wasn't going to pay my rent unless he started respecting my privacy and not entering my room. And number 10, let me just do this. Number 10, unless he started to clean and be sanitary in the public areas of the house. I suggested he take the matter to the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal in the hope that such official involvement would force him to reveal the team of undercover AFP terrorists I was trying to flush out. The stakeout house was clearly immediately to the right when facing the house from the street, so I could hear someone clambering up from there to enter and exit the air vent hatch several times per day, as mentioned. Boy, this must be like a really small person, right? I mean, how big are these air vent hatches? I mean, I know mine in New Jersey were only like a few inches, maybe 8 inches across, at least initially. Like, how do you get in there? You can't even fit a child in there. The agents would usually coordinate a loud flyover with a propeller plane or helicopter to cover the noise of their surveillance officers climbing onto my roof. But it's not a perfect system, particularly when the target has already heard it happen countless times and knows exactly what is really going on. The rental agent and the landlord of the property at that time, and or the next door neighbors on the left side when facing the house from the street, were all seemingly well aware of the stakeout operation. Number 14. Joe. At around 6 a.m. on the 2nd July 2010, I was woken by a loud bang on my bedroom door. When I opened it, a man in a black leather jacket with an orange stripe across it, who I had never seen before, burst in and started attacking me with kicks and punches. He was shorter than the average height and had a muscular build. His hair was sandy blonde or light brown. He was seemingly in his late 30s to mid 40s, having seen and had contact with evidently the same man on several occasions since then, including twice within the few days just weeks ago in Tenerife, and also earlier today when I approached him on the street in my own town. But he pretended to not speak English. Now let me scroll down here, guys. I can now confirm that his eyes are a piercing light blue color. My assailant may have been inebriated at the time, as his face was flushed red as if from consuming excessive alcohol. Joe's accomplice, Lloyd, was also seemingly drunk at the time of the assault, as he had been perpetually during the many weeks in which he collaborated with and inadvertently helped to expose the AFP team. My attacker yelled something about me taking my stuff and moving it out, so I knew he was clearly something to do with Lloyd. But a disgusting drunkard ex-lawyer with no friends is unlikely to have the type of connections who are willing to assault someone for him. The man then grabbed a handful of my belongings, ran to the top of the stairs, and threw them down. I retreated into my walk-in closet and dialed the emergency number, then went cautiously back into my room to see if he had gone. My attacker also returned to my room moments later. He picked up my desk chair and hit me with it, but the bottom part with the wheels flew off, so he swung at me with its metal pole instead. I somehow blocked it, but my hand was injured by the blow. A voice from my phone announced, "000, what is your emergency?" I said loudly I was being attacked at 34 Fenwick Street in Carlton North, and the operator said that police are on their way. When my assailant heard those words, he ran out of the room towards the stairs. Number 11. As soon as he left the room without word to him of me, Q, Lloyd ran into the room, turned left, ran to the internal ensuite door, went in, removed my barricades, and opened the door to the hallway. Lloyd was therefore clearly involved in the planning and execution of the premeditated attack and was evidently creating false evidence for their prefabricated cover story. In that time, my attacker had run down the stairs, and after emerging from completing his role in covering up the premeditated assault, Lloyd followed him down the bottom of the stairs. The man told Lloyd, "He's called the cops." I stood at the top of the stairsway, took a picture of the man from behind him, and told him to F off. I can't say it. He turned and started moving towards me again, up a couple of stairs, but then changed his mind, and he ran outside to the footpath. Lloyd followed him out, and they spoke a few more words that I couldn't hear properly. Four uniformed Victoria police officers arrived within a couple of minutes, 2 in a car from Fitzroy Police Station and 2 in a car from Carlton Police Station shortly after them. One of the officers photographed the photo I had taken of my assailant, then 2 of them sped off in their car to look for him. Now Senior Constable Ryan Davis, which is his real name, asked Lloyd who the man was, and he said, quote unquote, "a friend." Constable Davis asked, quote, "What is his name?" unquote, and Lloyd answered, "Joe," which is apparently also his real name, or why then they tried to off me later in the day to cover up the assault. "Do you have Joe's number?" they asked. And Lloyd answered no. Lloyd was then asked, quote, How do you communicate? Unquote. And he answered, email at that point. Joe miraculously returned to the scene of the crime, seemingly by slipping out the back gate of the stakeout house next door, where he had probably been listening to Lloyd identify him. Joe was then detained by the 4 Victoria police officers. My main interactions were with Constable Davis, who also took photos to document my injuries and my trashed room. Photos which may still exist in police records. The officers asked me if I wanted to press charges against Joe. In a panic, I declined. That was definitely a mistake, as that same disgraceful, corrupt AFP agent, along with his teammates, are still stalking me over a decade later, currently in Spain. I'm trying to cover up their crimes by unaliving me. I could have potentially ended it back then, and thereby pressing those charges. The officers let him go, assuring me, quote, "We know who he is if you want to press charges later," unquote. But I have since learned that they wrote the clearly premeditated attack up as a quote unquote domestic incident, and that it was only considered a quote unquote summary assault of offense, which is therefore no longer chargeable. As you have read, it is far from a domestic incident, and both men should be indicted for it. Joe's full name is probably still accessible in Victoria police records of the incident and or in the memories of the uniformed officers who attended that morning. And Lloyd also certainly knows Joe's last name and AFP email address. I declined to press charges at the time, partly because I naively thought the gesture of kindness and or the threat of further official exposure may encourage Joe and his colleagues to finally back off and leave me alone, but mostly because I thought pressing the charges against the cop, as I already suspected Joe was, would be pointless and dangerous, as it may further anger my tormentors. Number 12. I went back upstairs, and in the spare room I found a small green duffel bag that was removed shortly thereafter, and it must have belonged to Joe. I wished I had opened it, and there may have been even more clues inside. The situation had escalated, so I wrote a detailed account of the assault that morning in order to make sure of my version of the events would be recorded, just in case something more serious was to happen, as it sadly did just hours later. Early in the evening of the same day, someone banged on my locked bedroom door again. I called 000, and Constable Davis soon returned to question Lloyd for the second time that day, this time asking about who had been banging on my door moments earlier, and then fled just before the uniformed police arrived. "Joe's friends," Lloyd replied. Clearly it was some of Joe's AFP teammates. The AFP federal agents who banged on my door that evening were plausibly also involved in attempting to unalive me alongside Joe just hours later, as you will read. And Lloyd knows who they are. Lloyd clearly collaborated with the overall stakeout operation for many weeks prior and should therefore be able to share more details of it than I can provide as its target. Joe clearly had been stalking me as part of the relentless, aggressive, overt surveillance program described herein. Getting himself caught up by Victoria's police officers exposed him, his teammates, and his handlers to the possibility of official scrutiny. As described, it was particularly terrifying, premeditated, violent physical assault in which I was surprise attacked, injured, and traumatized, and he was lucky to get away with it. If only he and his colleagues had decided to let it rest there and leave me alone. I would probably have let it also rest. No such luck. I wonder what story he told the supervisor. And then as she then ordered him to eliminate me, as you will learn. The Victoria police records of that violent assault link Joe, his team, and his boss to me, and that evidence is clearly why they were, and in part, still determined to silence me. Well, guys, I'm on page 15, and I'm over an hour, a little over an hour right now. I have to get going here. I hope you enjoyed this. I will read part 2. This is part 1 of When Pigs Fly, Adrian Columb. I'm on page 15. There are 19 pages. I will read the rest in a part 2 and maybe a synopsis and stuff. Go back over it, pick out the highlights and stuff. But I hope you enjoyed it. Please hit the thumbs up, get the message out there. This is a testimony. This is another testimony. Targeted person who's traveled all over the world to get away from this. He has exposed some of these people. He's called them out. They're climbing in vents, for God's sake, you know? But anyway, this is Lorraine Alternative Homesteading. Hope everybody's doing well. And it is snowing furiously here in eastern Kentucky. I was hoping it would stop, but no. It's worse here than in New Jersey. I'm going to sign off for now. I hope everybody's doing well. Hello, everybody. There were a couple of paragraphs that I skipped over when I was reading Adrian's testimony, part 1. And here we go. That evening I heard the voice of the same man who had assaulted me, this time in a conversation with his female boss as they sat in the ventilation shaft above my room. I was sure it was him, as I'd heard his voice just that morning during the assault. I had suspected that my constant in-roof stalker was the same man who had attacked me, but then I was sure. Lloyd may have well been coached on how to deflect police inquiry, but I estimate that under pressure he would probably tell everything he knows about the illegal AFP stakeout operation he collaborated with, probably more reluctantly about his role in planning and participating in the assault on me in conjunction with Joe. As Lloyd said to the Victoria police that morning, Joe and he had been communicating by email. The emails sent to and from Lloyd's address at that time was lonoske@rabbit.com.av. For example, on his old laptop and or in his ISP's historical records, and also in Joe's AFP email account, AFP email server records may therefore still contain evidence of the clandestine operation. The emails they sent on that day of the assault would probably be of particular interest. Joe and the woman had a discussion inside the ventilation shaft above my room that they had been his regular perch to watch me from. They were unaware that I could hear them. I heard her voice giving directions to him and other surveillance officers while they sat in roofs on multiple occasions during the early years. They discussed me as I cleaned up my trashed room and started picking up to move out. As had been suggested by Constable Davis on his second visit, I also barricaded my doors to prevent any further home invasion. The woman said, quote, "I've seen enough," unquote, and then casually ordered Joe to, quote, "put something under his car," unquote. Apparently, talking about causing me to crash my vehicle into an object plausibly to unalive. At that time, I thought she must have meant putting a bomb under it, but I was soon corrected. Several hours later, that night, the AFP team coordinated a failed attempt on my life, where they tried to engineer conditions in which I would have a fatal car accident, as you will read. If I packed up the rest of my room in a rush, loaded it in the car, and drove to my mom's house, where I had parked, and went inside. Not long after I arrived, I heard several voices talking outside the fence. So I took our 2 large dogs to the adjacent park to investigate. There I came upon a group of adults who quickly dispersed. I couldn't make out their details, as was trying to manage the dogs at the same time. I didn't want whatever the agents were planning for me to affect my family too, and my car was still loaded up with all my belongings and not very easy drive with the extra weight. So I got in my mom's car and went driving. I thought keeping moving would be the safest option. Good evening, everybody. This is Lorraine, Alternative Homesteading. It's January 20th, 2024. And I'm going to continue reading the testimony of Adrian Columb. But before I do, please hit the thumbs up. Again, this is with permission. And Pigs Might Fly by Adrian Columb. The disclaimer is, this historical account is intended to serve as my testimony about the events described if I cannot give it in person. Some of the names, places, and affiliations mentioned have been changed to protect the innocent. Apart from that, the story is as in real life. I can unmask the obfuscated details if there's good reason, but would prefer not to for safety reasons. A vast wealth of details has also either been summarized or omitted in the interest of brevity and because my deadline is tight, but I can potentially elaborate on and or explain those on request. This history is mostly presented in chronological order, but wherever that is not the case, I have noted the year, for example, where I draw connections or comparisons with more recent events. So we're going to continue on to number 15, Death Trap. This is actually page 14. The trap was set on a small, unnamed road that runs parallel to the northern side of Melbourne's Eastern Freeway, off Yarra Valley Road. Google Maps says it has a historic relic bluestone pillar on the left when coming down the steep hill. One corner of the Westfield South Oval is quite close to the location where the large rock was clearly intended to kill me, was placed on the road at the bottom of it. As I drove down the hill, I saw a yellow taxi parked on my side of the road. Due to some recent experiences, I was already suspicious that some taxis were used as undercover cars, so I was alert but not yet alarmed. As I came down the hill toward the taxi, it pulled out across my lane and stopped. I could see the right-hand driver's side of the car. A man then got out of the left-hand side back passenger door, bent down out of my view for a few seconds, and put the large rock on the road in the path of my car, hidden from my view by their vehicle. He stood upright again and turned to look at me for a moment, seemingly checking if the rock was aligned with my front right driver's side wheel, then got back into the car. His height, frame, and the shape of his head were seemingly the same as those of Joe, who had attacked me at my home that morning. Though I could not see his face very well, or that of the driver either, I am certain that it was Joe. There was also no one else who even remotely wanted to hurt me, let alone murder me, so Joe, his boss, and several of his teammates at the time all clearly know about the incident. One of their unmarked gray military-style helicopters also flew across my field of vision from right to left as I came down that hill, seemingly in order to draw my gaze upwards so I would be distracted and so hopefully wouldn't notice the death trap being set for me on the ground. At the last minute, the taxi pulled out of my lane slowly, blocking the other lane to box me in, so I had nowhere to go but straight at the rock. When the taxi moved out of my lane, it was also already too late for me to see the rock in time to stop. I pumped the brakes to try to slow down, but I couldn't do so quickly enough. This setup was clearly a tactical maneuver designed so that I would hit the rock and be unalived. Sadly for my attackers, as mentioned earlier that night, I had heard Joe and his boss talking about putting something under my car. While I didn't yet know the specific form of the coming attack, I was lucky to be driving my mother's car, which was sturdier and higher off the ground than my own. I managed to steer enough to at least not hit the rock with the front wheel, and luckily I cleared it and went right over the top. It would almost certainly have ended my life if I hadn't hit it. The incident happened in a dead-end road, so I made a quick U-turn, stared slack-jawed at the large rock as I passed it in the opposite lane, counted my lucky stars to have survived, and saw the taxi speeding away up the hill. The attack was seemingly coordinated by the crew of the helicopter. The federal agents who used that aircraft on that night in 2010 may have been from a joint state federal police task force, for example, Piranha. So the aircraft may have belonged to Victoria Police, but the AFP also have their own pilots and aircraft, so maybe no Victoria Police officers were involved. There may yet be evidence available that proves what I've said about that attempt on my life, and I am seeking it out while at the same time being actively deterred from doing so by Australian federal agents Joe and his corrupt colleagues, who are currently trying to end my life here in Tenerife. If it can be determined who was in that undercover car, for example, who placed and then hid that rock on the road, and who was the getaway driver, and or if it can be established who was in the helicopter on that night, for example, if it becomes possible to access as yet elusive historical GPS ADSB radar records, it would then be possible to know who was involved in that attempt to unalive me. I sped up the hill, followed the taxi across the small overpass, and then down onto the motorway again, where I lost sight of it as I sped away from there as fast as I could, totally terrified again for the second time that day. That night I crawled into my sleeping parents' bedroom and slept on the floor beside their bed for safety, hoping the AFP team was not willing to unalive all three of us just to silence me. I was extremely traumatized by the realization that these AFP federal agents had in fact just tried to kill me, and terribly frightened by the potential implications of that for my future. I have since been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder directly related to events mentioned in this history, two of the most traumatic of which by far were being assaulted and then almost unalived on the same day by federal police as described above. After these police officers tried to end my life, I then shielded myself from them as best I could for as long as I could, still totally terrified by the attempts on my life and the ongoing harassment program, until I finally managed to flee from Australia to exile overseas in mid-2012. Number 16. Preview of future history. In a very brief summary of the period between fleeing Australia into exile and the present day, during 4 unavoidable visits home to Australia in the past decade, the same AFP team made my life a living hell, including twice when I returned briefly in 2018 for my father's funeral, and then again a few weeks later for his memorial service. Seemingly nothing is sacred to them, even harassing me on the day of my dad's funeral while I was grieving for the loss of a beloved parent. Several weeks later, their aircraft also seemingly flew over as I was sprinkling some of his ashes on the finish line at Flemington Race Course after his memorial service there, at which I had just spoken about him, and so was already very emotional. Again, clearly nothing is sacred to these thugs, and no opportunity for psychological attack of their target is too cruel. Birthdays are another favorite opportunity to really torment me, but any special occasion will do. Though I'm not sure of the exact model of helicopter used in the 2010 attack. It was very similar in appearance to Victoria Police's 3 newly acquired Augusta Westland AW-139s, one of which was used to terrorize me on at least 2 occasions. In Melbourne in September 2020, those 2020 flyovers by a dark gray-brown AW-139 with flight number POL-32 can be seen in videos I filmed during both apparent harassment attempts as I was preparing to flee the country again while living at 10 Lumley Court, Prahran in Melbourne. The first example, from the 16th of September 2020, is in pieces in the 3 videos and he posts links to the videos. I can cut and paste them into the description of this video. So it's https vimeo.com/542-795-112, and the same goes for number 542-795-455, 542-795-208, and now see the flight path in the video at https vimeo.com/690662725, or directly at https://www.flightradar24.com 2020-09-16/06:10/pol32/2583 E lowercase f1d. If you make an account and log in which you can see how it flies across the front of my apartment several times for several minutes as I film it. The second example, from 23rd September 2020, playable at vimeo.com, 542-788-532, shows the exact same helicopter doing the same apparent terror tactics, but even worse at that time, and lasting 15 plus minutes. Now see the flight path playback in the video, vimeo.com, 689829104, or directly at www.flightradar24.com 2020-08-22/02:15/pol32/2556 lowercase FBC8 if you make an account and log in. In them you can see the helicopter's flight path during the airborne terrorism session goes directly above where my apartment was, and also directly in front of me several times as I filmed it during that disgraceful, terrifying testosterone display. Now, imagine such terrifying flyovers happening over and over again, wherever you go in your city, and subsequently across the world. I can also present numerous other example videos and or flight path playbacks of terrifying flyover sessions up to 40 plus minutes in duration, both in Australia and also overseas by similar fleets of aircraft owned by foreign federal police forces or chartered locally. It is all perpetuated by the same criminal police abusing their power and our public funds for their own objectives. In this case, suppression and covering up of attempted unaliving with unaliving. I have tried to be thorough in the chronology above, but as I mentioned at the beginning, it is nonetheless significantly abbreviated, and many events have therefore either been summarized or omitted, so please feel free to ask for more details about those and other events. In light of the attempts on my life, the physical assaults, and the threats of extreme violence I have endured, the Australian federal agents responsible would clearly much prefer to end my life instead of facing the consequences of the things they have done to me over the years, and which they continue to do with ever more ferocious intensity in the present. I hope Victoria Police and Victoria's public prosecutors have a field day with this one. If they summons Joe, his handlers, and his teammates back to Australia from Europe to face the crimes they committed in Victoria, and if I'm still able to help with an official inquiry by then, I will gladly assist in putting these lawless criminal power abusers behind bars so they can't terrorize, torture, or attempt to unalive me or anyone ever again. To everyone else, I will get the rest of the story out if and when I possibly can. But I need to take a break from sitting in one place where they can readily target me. So it may be a while, if ever. After more than a decade living in exile overseas, apart from a few brief, unavoidable trips home, as I mentioned previously, I was forced back to Melbourne by the Jabby 19 pandemic in early April 2020. The situation escalated even further while I was stuck in the same city for 6 months with these corrupt federal agents who clearly still wanted to unalive me. I was in contact with Victoria Police Detective Senior Constable Paul Thomas, which is his real name, about a recent home invasion by some large men who had tried to force their way into my apartments at 10 Lumley Court in Prahran, who were quite plausibly AFP agents, though I didn't say that to the detective for fear of provoking further reprisal. Oops, I just scrolled too past. 1 second. Joe and his colleagues were seemingly particularly enraged by an email I sent to the detective asking if I could still press charges over the 2010 assault, to which he replied, quote unquote, absolutely. So enraged, in fact, that this time they followed me overseas when I fled, evidently to try to silence me once and for all by finishing the job of unaliving me. I've been very lucky to avoid that outcome so far, but they are working hard day by day to end me. It's been an extraordinary journey since I fled Australia again in early August 2020. These police terrorists have really doubled down on their bet that no one will be able to work them out and try to stop them before they manage to eliminate me and bury as much of the story as possible along with me. They may yet be correct about that, but I'm determined that the rest of the story should also be told if possible. I'm a survivor. But let's see. To be honest, if I am to survive this ongoing ordeal, then I could really use and would really appreciate some help from people more powerful than myself, who carry out the rule of law, democracy, and the preservation of human rights. For example, honest senior police, politicians, journalists, and or civil society organizations in Australia and or overseas. And let me just scroll up here. My cursor just disappeared. I trust this historical account has been informative. I would not have gone so public with the story if any of the parties I have complained to about the ongoing terror operation at seemingly almost all levels of law enforcement, government, and the media in Australia, and also, to some extent, same overseas, had not either dismissed me out of hands or not even replied. I feel your pain, Adrian. This is happening to you, me, everyone. Gaslighting. The parties concerned all seemingly either unwittingly or knowingly protect federal agents from scrutiny. But as Australian folk music legend Paul Kelly sang, quote, "From little things, big things grow," unquote. So I live in hope. Unless someone investigates the AFP officers concerned, then they will seemingly literally get away with my unaliving, but nobody's rushing out to investigate these blatantly corrupt police. At least not so far, but that's not surprising considering how dangerous an enemy they make for. If I had the choice, I would also steer well clear of them. But there are those who should, and if given the right motivation, just might investigate them, as corrupt conduct by Australian federal agents clearly falls under their purview, primarily the Australian Commission for Law Enforcement Integrity, which is ACLEI, which the agents clearly fear, but which dismissed my complaint. The AFP's Office of Professional Standards, which the agents clearly don't fear as much, and which also dismissed my complaint. The AFP's commissioner, who didn't reply to my emails, one of which I was returned to me in Freedom of Information request for everything the agency has on file about me. The Federal Minister for Home Affairs, whose portfolios these AFP agents fall under, who could seemingly fire them all today, but who has ignored my repeated requests for assistance. The Federal Foreign Minister, who has ignored my requests for help, and whose diplomats in Germany stopped replying when I requested they come with me to the police, who, incidentally, I copied on the email, whose Commissioner Sunderman of the Landeskriminalamt, also known as the Berlin State Police, State Criminal Police, replied, and whose detectives seemingly then spent many subsequent months investigating the matter. Then there is the Federal Attorney General, who seemingly needs to authorize such international operations as this in the first place, and who must seemingly have been hoodwinked into doing so. Several of the overseas federal police agencies which facilitate the international terror program by hosting these Australian federal agents, providing them with equipment, surveillance officers, aircraft, cars, etc. on a reciprocal basis, so they are reluctant to investigate their guests. Then there is Interpol, Europol, and or Eurojust, which must have also been tricked into facilitating these agents' terrorism, torture, and aspirations of me for unaliving. The Joint Parliamentary Committee on Intelligence and Security, whose oversight can seemingly penetrate the operational wall, members of which, including its chairman, have ignored my repeated requests for help. The Commonwealth Ombudsman, who oversees complaints against the public service, who has also ignored my complaint. The Public Service Commissioner, whose role is admittedly limited to the agents limited as the agents would need to volunteer for assessment, which is an unlikely scenario. The many journalists who are either too biased or too busy to look at enough of the evidence to see that the truth of the matter is too scared to cover up the story when they realize it's true. And last but certainly not least, our elected Prime Minister, who, by his own recent public admission, the buck always stops with, but who has also ignored my many requests for his help to end these Australian federal agents' terrorism campaign against me. All these checks and balances have failed to provide the safety net for society and its citizens that they were intended to. As mentioned, I have contacted all of the above and have either been dismissed out of hand or outright ignored. Seemingly, the only thing that could get any of them moving on this is public outrage generated, for example, through exposure in the media. But as described, there's a perpetual catch-22 preventing such stories from reaching the news cycle. And these corrupt police know that all too well. The system is clearly broken. The intentional terrorism campaign to suppress and evidently also eliminate me as soon as possible is relentless, having spanned at least 7 countries so far, including Australia, Germany several times, Spain twice, Romania, the Netherlands, France, the United Kingdom, and probably also throughout Scandinavia, the Indian subcontinent, and Asia previously, all of which you will also learn about if I survive long enough to tell those parts of the history. According to AFP Office of Professional Standards' reply to my complaint email sent in early February 2021, there was no person-entity record about me in the AFP's Police Real-Time Management Information System, which is PROMIS, P-R-O-M-I-S, in 2009. The overt surveillance cum harassment program waged against me from that time onward in Melbourne was therefore almost certainly, quote-unquote, off the books, also known as totally illegal. But to operate with such impunity internationally as currently, these agents must have left a paper trail. Example, they must have falsified jurisdiction for a major criminal investigation as a cover for their terrorism campaign. Example, through Interpol abuse. So at least that's a positive outcome of my having fled their tyranny in Australia into exile. I just hope the other federal police forces hosting them overseas are more honest than their disgracefully corrupt guests, and that they will soon decide to shut the terror operation down once and for all. I also hope I can survive that long, but maybe only the subsequent victims of the same police terrorists will benefit from my efforts to expose them. I at least wanted to publish this part of the history now, just in case I'm not able to do so later. The truth of the origins of this extraordinary matter needed to be made public, and there should be consequences for the corrupt police officers responsible. I'm also in the process of analyzing further evidence that I've collected, and I'm preparing it for imminent public release. In the meantime, you can see some of the evidence I've collected so far in many of the posts from the past year plus on my LinkedIn profile and in the videos on my Vimeo account. See the links on page 1. Without having read the above part of the history, many of my public posts may seem outrageous. And without having read the as yet unwritten further history, in particular from 2020 to the present, some posts may still seem wild. But I haven't lied to you, and I never will, so please bear with me as I continue the piecemeal process of collecting and publishing further evidence against these well-trained criminal intelligence police who know how to hide their tracks, while they continue to try to unalive me in ways that give them plausible deniability. Well, thank you so much, Adrian. I'm just going to give a little bit of feedback here. First of all, if anybody reads this accounting of what has happened to you and is gaslighting you in disbelief. You know that they're complicit. The fact that you have flew to so many different countries, and this followed you, is a testament that this is a worldwide corrupt program. It's worldwide. It is extremely well funded. It's so well documented and riveting. I mean, if I could use that word, riveting. And I'm actually, it's horrifying that anyone has to live like this, fleeing for your life as if you're a convicted criminal, that you escaped from the maximum security penitentiary, which is not the case. And I'd like to add something, because targeted people are led to believe that they have done something bad in the past, that it was because of their past behaviors that they're being tortured now, that they're placed in this program to fix what they did wrong in the past. I can assure you that everybody walking this planet has done something wrong in the past. We were all children, right? We were all children. We were all testosterone and estrogen-laden adolescents. We all experimented. We all had friends that we may or may not have liked. We may have had friends that were not the best for us, that we associated with them, and by association may have been looked at as being like them when we were not. This is life. This is what happens in life. And I guarantee the criminals that are perpetrating these crimes against you and me and everybody else have had similar experiences, similar backgrounds. In fact, it is widely known, at least here in the United States, that many people that go into the police force were bullied as children. That's right, they were bullied. So they don't want that to happen again. So they enter the police force. And then what happens is, I mean, we all know this. If you don't heal your past, if you don't deal with your demons, you're forced to repeat them over and over again. Whatever we repress is distorted, and it just surfaces in horrific ways. So, for instance, let's say many of these officers that are tracking you down, maybe they were abused as children, maybe they were bullied, maybe they had an authoritarian parent and they decided to go into the police force, but they haven't dealt with their demons. So they have chosen instead to seek revenge upon you and other people, rather than on the parents that tortured them, rather than on a parent that put them down, rather than on the kids that may have bullied them. And this is just, one perspective. I'm sure that my viewers will have other perspectives. And Pigs Might Fly by Adrian Columb. So, some other takebacks is that as Brian Coffrin, private security consultant, whistleblower, has clearly stated numerous times that this is a behavior modification program, and that they target the best of the best. He stated in testimony that most targeted individuals are highly intelligent, and clearly, Adrian, you have outdid yourself with this, with your testimony, your disclaimer, your evidence, the fact that you have undergone some medical testing to prove your claim, you've got a lawsuit. Where do you go, though? Absolutely. Where do you go? You've also clearly documented, on these last pages of the groups that you've contacted. I'm sure that we've got people that are listening that have a similar list of agencies, professional agencies that you've contacted that are in a position to be able to assist, that it's their jobs to assist, and instead dismiss your complaint, ignore your complaints, don't respond to your complaint. They're ignored. And even though you repeatedly ask for assistance, you're completely ignored. You don't receive responses. This is common. This is unfortunately so common. This is why it's so difficult for targeted people to gain legal representation. So, but it's clearly you're highly intelligent. I would venture to say that you have a very high IQ. And I haven't had time. And the couple of times that I went to Vimeo, it was telling me that at least the primary link was not coming up for me. It was telling me that it didn't exist. But now that you have outlined the detailed, let's see, up here, the detailed links, the individual links, I will cut and paste those and go directly there. If I have to create an account, I'll create an account. So anyway, thank you so much for offering this testimony. And I do hope that you add some more paragraphs to this and give us an update from 2020 to 2023. And of course, I mean, we're into 2024. We're almost at the end of January already, which is unbelievable how fast January's gone. But I know as a targeted person myself that every day it's something. Even if it's a little thing. I mean, right now we've got, probably over the last week, a foot of snow, which is very unusual in Kentucky. And the criminals are not driving back and forth, but that's usually the case in the wintertime. They take off, and then they're raring to go by March. I'm sure this happens to you too, depending on the weather by you. But I found it really interesting. I just wanted to mention about the duct work. Now, I've heard this from other people. Now, as I'd mentioned, when I lived in Manalapan, New Jersey, I know what my duct work looked like. It was not nearly it wasn't large enough for a person to get into. I mean, although there was some ductwork in the attic that was a little bit larger than like the ductwork for the forced hot air. But they would actually throw things, toxic substances into the ductwork. Yellow substance, that yellow drippy stuff. But that was absolutely fascinating that you uncovered that there was actual person in there, and that you blew that stuff in there and you hear this person coughing. That was phenomenal. You actually caught the creep. But anyway, I hope everybody is doing well. Please hit the thumbs up on testimony, sharing testimony stories, part 2, Adrian Columb. And if, again, this is just a plea for anybody out there. If you have the technological skills to piece together part 1 and part 2, that would be wonderful. I just didn't have enough time yesterday to do another half an hour or 40 minutes onto what I'd already read. And I was actually, my voice was getting tired. And, the night before I'd had like a 4-hour sneezing fit. Thank you, criminals, for the 4-hour sneezing fit. So, so like my throat is a little scratchy and stuff. So anyway, thank you so much, Adrian. I'm going to piece this together for put this together for you. I hope you enjoyed the little the little piggy, flying pig thumbnail. I thought it was really cute. I didn't realize how many of them there are on the internet, and they're free. So this is Lorraine Alternative Homesteading. Hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and please feel free to share this testimony. And I'm going to sign off for now, exposing one criminal at a time.